Before we get to the story, I'd like to say thanks so much for visiting my new channel. I'm going to be uploading cosmic horror related stories every single day. So if that sounds good, please drop a like and don't forget to subscribe. It means a lot, especially when just getting started. I hope you enjoy the story. I've lived in Harlow Bend my entire life. Born here, raised here, and except for 2 years of trade school in Omaha when I was 19, I've never left. It's a small town, maybe 600 people, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where families have lived for generations, where nothing much changes from one decade to the next. My name is Colton Reece. I'm 42 years old, and I make my living as a carpenter and handyman. I build cabinets, repair porches, fix whatever needs fixing for the people who've known me since I was a baby. It's good work, honest work, and it keeps me busy enough that I don't spend too much time thinking about things I can't change. But there's one thing I've always thought about, even when I tried not to. Something happened in this town in the summer of 1987. I was 4 years old, too young to understand, too young to remember clearly. But I remember something. Fragments. Being carried outside in the middle of the night. My mother's arms tight around me. Voices in the darkness. The whole town awake and gathered. Everyone. Looking up at the sky. And I remember the sky being wrong. I've never been able to get anyone to tell me what happened that night. When I was young and asked my parents, they changed the subject. When I asked other adults, they got quiet and uncomfortable. By the time I was a teenager, I understood that whatever happened was something people had agreed not to discuss. Not a rumor, not a scandal. Something else. Something that had marked everyone who was there. Now I'm 42, and the people who remember that night are dying. I stood at the graveside of Mabel Hutchins last week, the oldest woman in town, 93 years old, when her heart finally gave out. The funeral was small, just the people who'd known her longest, and as I watched them lower her casket into the ground, I noticed something I'd noticed at every funeral for the past decade. The older residents shared a look, a glance that passed between them, unspoken but unmistakable, an understanding that had nothing to do with Mabel and everything to do with something they'd all experienced together. The survivors of whatever happened in 1987 were recognizing each other, acknowledging their shared burden, and every year there were fewer of them. I decided it was time to finally learn the truth. Earl Coombs was the retired postmaster, 81 years old, still sharp despite his age. He'd always been friendly to me, hired me for odd jobs over the years, treated me like a nephew, even though we weren't related. I figured if anyone would tell me what happened, it would be Earl. I found him on his porch on a Tuesday afternoon, sitting in the shade with a glass of iced tea. He smiled when he saw me coming up the walk. "Colton, what brings you by?" I sat down in the chair next to him and didn't waste time with small talk. "I want to know what happened in 1987, Earl. The night the whole town was outside looking at the sky." The smile faded from his face like water draining from a sink. The warmth in his eyes turned to something hard and frightened. "We don't talk about that, son. You know we don't." "I know you don't. That's why I'm asking. I was there too, Earl. I have a right to know." "You were 4 years old. You don't remember." "I remember some of it. Enough to know something happened. enough to know it's been eating at everyone who was there for almost 40 years. Earl looked away, staring out at the street, his jaw tight. Some things are better left alone, Colton. Your parents understood that. They wanted to protect you from it. My parents are dead. So is everyone else who could have told me. You're one of the last ones left, Earl. When you're gone, the truth dies with you. He was quiet for a long time. Then he shook his head. I'm sorry. I can't. I tried Dottie Vance next. At the diner she'd run for 35 years. She was more sympathetic, more willing to acknowledge that something had happened. But she wouldn't tell me either. You were so little, she said, wiping down the counter even though it was already clean. We thought maybe you'd forget entirely. Most of the children did. Or they convinced themselves they'd imagined it. Imagined what, Dottie? She hesitated, and for a moment I thought she was going to tell me. Then the bell over the door rang as another customer came in, and the moment passed. It's not my place, she said. We all agreed back then. We wouldn't talk about it. Not to outsiders, not to each other, not to the children. Why? Because there's no point. Because talking about it doesn't change what happened. Because some things... She trailed off, her eyes going distant. Some things you just have to live with. I talked to others who'd been children that night. My old friend Bo Hensley claimed he had no memory of anything unusual. But when I pressed him, he got agitated, almost angry. I don't remember, and I don't want to remember. Leave it alone, Colt. Nina Paulson, who I'd known since kindergarten, admitted to having nightmares sometimes. I dream about the sky, she said, about looking up and seeing something wrong. But I don't know what it means, and I don't want to know. The pattern was clear. The children had been too young to fully understand what they saw, and the adults had never explained it. But something lived in their subconscious, surfacing in dreams and unease. I was about to give up when I remembered Wendell Straub. Wendell was 84 years old, a farmer on the edge of town who'd always kept to himself. He wasn't unfriendly, just solitary, a man who preferred the company of his fields to the company of people. I'd done some work for him over the years, fixed his barn door and replaced some rotted boards on his porch, and he'd always paid promptly and fairly. I found him sitting on that same porch on a warm evening in late summer, a glass of whiskey in his hand, looking out at the land he'd worked his whole life. He didn't seem surprised to see me. Colton Reece. Figured you'd come around eventually. You know why I'm here. You've been asking questions all over town. Word gets around. He gestured to the chair beside him. Sit down. You want a drink? I sat, and he poured me a whiskey from the bottle at his feet. We sat in silence for a while, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. They won't tell you, Wendell said, finally. Earl, Dottie, the others, they made an agreement back in 1987, and they've kept it all these years. But you didn't agree. I agreed, but I always thought it was pointless. You can't keep a secret like that forever, and the people who lived through it deserve to understand what they lived through. He took a long drink. You want to know what happened that night? Yes. Then I'll tell you. But I'm warning you, son. Once you know, you can't unknow it. It'll be with you for the rest of your life, the same way it's been with all of us. I understand. Wendell looked at me for a long moment, weighing something. Then he nodded. It was late July, hot night, humid, the kind of summer night where nobody sleeps well. I was out here on this very porch, trying to catch a breeze, when my dog started barking. Not his usual bark, not the one he used for raccoons or coyotes. Something different, something scared. I went out to quiet him down, and that's when I noticed the sky. He paused, refilling his glass, gathering his thoughts. It was like looking at a ceiling that was starting to crack. You know how old paint will craze before it peels? Lines spreading out from a central point? That's what the sky looked like. Lines spreading across the stars. I felt a chill despite the warm evening. Lines in the sky? Within minutes, the whole town was awake. People were coming out of their houses, standing in their yards, looking up. The lines kept spreading, kept branching, until the whole sky was covered in them. And then, the sky opened. I waited, not daring to speak. It wasn't like a hole, exactly, Wendell said slowly. More like, you know how when you're underwater, you can look up and see the surface, the way the light bends, the way you can tell there's something above you, something different. The sky opened, and we could see that there was something on the other side, something outside. Outside what? Outside everything. Outside the sky, outside the stars, outside. He shook his head. Outside reality, I guess. Like the universe is a room, and we suddenly saw through the ceiling to whatever's beyond the room. My mouth was dry. I took a drink of whiskey, barely tasting it. What was out there? Wendell was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was rough. I'm not sure I can describe it. I'm not sure anyone can. It wasn't empty space. It wasn't darkness or light or anything that had a name. It was like geometry, but not the kind we know. Structure that didn't make sense. That hurt to look at. Not because it was bright or ugly, but because your brain couldn't process it. There was something out there, Colton. Pattern, organization. Like everything we know, everything that exists is sitting inside something else. Something built. Built by what? I don't know. I don't think any of us knew. It didn't move, didn't react to us looking at it. But it felt aware somehow. Like we were seeing something that wasn't meant to be seen, and it knew we were seeing it. I sat with that for a moment, trying to wrap my mind around what he was describing. How long did it last? 45 seconds, maybe. Less than a minute. The whole town standing outside, looking up, nobody saying a word. Just silence. And that structure, that impossible geometry, visible through the crack in the sky. And then the sky closed back up. The lines healed over, like a wound sealing itself. And it was just stars again, same as always. He drained his glass and set it down. But it wasn't the same. Nothing was the same after that. Wendell told me about the aftermath, how people tried to talk about what they'd seen in the days that followed, but the conversations went nowhere. No one had the language to describe it, and the more they tried to articulate it, the worse they felt. It was like trying to remember a dream, he said. The harder you reached for the details, the more they slipped away. Except the feeling didn't slip away. The knowledge that we'd seen something fundamental, something true, that stayed. Eventually, By unspoken agreement, people stopped talking about it. Life went on. Crops were planted, children went to school, people got married and had babies and grew old. But everyone who was there that night carried the knowledge with them. Some people handled it better than others, Wendell said. Your parents, they managed, kept busy, focused on you and your sister, didn't dwell on it. Others weren't so lucky. You remember old Tom Ferris? Shot himself in 1992. Margie Cullen drank herself to death by 1995. People said it was depression, said it was personal problems. But we all knew what it really was. I thought about the suicides and early deaths that had marked my childhood, the funerals I'd attended, without understanding why so many people in our small town seemed to give up on living. Why didn't you tell anyone? I asked. Why didn't you tell the children? What would be the point? What would we say? Hey kids, just so you know, reality is a bubble inside something incomprehensible, and we saw the inside of the bubble once. That doesn't help anyone. And we figured if we didn't talk about it, if we let it fade, maybe the next generation could live without that weight. Maybe you could just be normal, believe in a normal universe, have normal lives. He looked at me with something like pity. We were trying to protect you, all of you, from knowing what we know. I went home that night and sat on my own porch, looking up at the sky. The stars looked the same as they always had. Distant, cold, indifferent. But now I saw them differently. I imagined the sky as a ceiling, a boundary, a membrane separating everything I knew from whatever lay beyond. I imagined cracks spreading across that membrane, light bleeding through from the other side. I imagined seeing what Wendell had described, structure beyond comprehension, the architecture of something that contained the universe itself. And I understood, for the first time, why the survivors had chosen silence. Over the following weeks, I talked to the other survivors, armed with what Wendell had told me. Earl Coombs finally broke his silence, though he wasn't happy about it. His description matched Wendell's. The cracks, the opening, the glimpse of something beyond. But Earl focused on different details. The silence, he said. That's what I remember most. Nobody made a sound, not a gasp, not a scream, not a word. We all just stood there, looking up, and it was like the whole world had gone quiet. And the feeling of being small. Not just small, like a person is small compared to the sky. Small like nothing. Like everything we'd ever done or thought or believed was completely meaningless compared to what we were seeing. Dottie Vance talked about the aftermath, the funerals, the breakdowns, the way the town closed ranks around its secret. We were protecting ourselves as much as the children, she admitted. If we didn't talk about it, we could almost pretend it was a dream, a shared hallucination, something that didn't really happen. But you know it did. Yes, we all know. And that's the burden, isn't it? Knowing something you can never unknow. As I learned more, my own memories began to clarify. I remembered being carried outside, my mother's arms around me. I remembered looking up at the sky, at something that made no sense to my 4-year-old brain. I remembered the silence, the stillness, the feeling that the world had stopped. And I remembered my mother's voice, very soft, close to my ear. Don't look, baby. Close your eyes. But I didn't close my eyes. I looked. And somewhere deep in my mind, buried under decades of forgetting, I'd always known what I saw. A few weeks after our conversation, Wendell Straub had a stroke. I visited him in the hospital, sitting by his bed while machines beeped and hummed around us. He was diminished, struggling to speak, but his eyes were still clear. "Did I do wrong?" he asked. "Telling you?" "No," I said. "I needed to know. Maybe, or maybe your mother was right. Maybe it's better not to look." Before I left, he grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "There's one thing I didn't tell you. One thing I've never told anyone." "What?" "When the sky opened, when we were all looking up at whatever that was, I had a feeling, just for a second, a feeling that it was looking back. Not at us specifically, not at the town or the earth or even the universe, but at the bubble, at the inside of whatever we're inside of. And I thought, just for a second, that it was checking, making sure we were still there, making sure we were still contained." Wendell died 3 days later. I was one of 6 people at his funeral. In the months that followed, I felt the knowledge settling into me like sediment sinking to the bottom of a glass. I understood now why the survivors didn't talk about what they'd seen. It wasn't that the memory was painful, though it was. It was that there was nothing to do with the knowledge. You can't act on it. You can't change it. You can't warn anyone or prepare for anything. You just have to carry it every day, knowing what you know. I started having the dreams that Nina Paulson had mentioned. Dreams of looking up at the sky and seeing it crack. Dreams of the membrane thinning, bulging, straining against something on the other side. Dreams of the opening widening instead of closing, of seeing more and more of the incomprehensible structure beyond. I would wake from these dreams sweating, heart pounding, and I understood why some of the survivors couldn't cope. The weight of knowing was heavier than I'd imagined. But I coped. I had to. I went back to work, building cabinets and repairing decks, and doing the ordinary things that filled my days. I talked to the other survivors less frequently, but when we saw each other, there was a new understanding between us. I was one of them now. I carried the weight. I watched the children of Harlow Bend grow up. They played in the streets, went to school, worried about homework and friendships and all the small concerns of childhood. They didn't know what happened in 1987. They didn't carry the burden. And I understood, finally, why the survivors chose silence. It wasn't cowardice or denial. It was mercy. Why burden another generation with knowledge they can't use? Why make them carry something that only makes life harder to bear? The universe is a bubble inside something vast and strange. We are very small, and there's nothing we can do about it. Knowing the truth doesn't help anyone. It only makes the days harder to get through. The years passed. Earl Coombs died, then Dottie Vance, then the others, one by one. I went to their funerals and stood at their graves and watched the last of the witnesses disappear into the earth. Now, I'm the only one left who knows the truth. Sometimes I think about writing it down, leaving a record for future generations. Sometimes I think about telling my niece or my friends or anyone who will listen. But I don't. I choose silence, the same silence my parents chose, the same silence the whole town chose. Not because the truth isn't important, but because some truths don't help anyone. because knowing that reality is contained inside something incomprehensible doesn't change how you live your life. It only makes living harder. Last night, I sat on my porch and looked up at the stars. The sky was clear, the Milky Way visible in a way it never is in cities. I thought about what lies beyond those stars, beyond the galaxies, beyond the edge of everything we can see. I thought about the membrane, the boundary, the ceiling that opened once and showed a small town in Nebraska what was on the other side. 37 years have passed, and the sky has never opened again. Maybe it never will. Maybe that night was a fluke, a one-time glimpse through a crack that has since healed. Or maybe someday it will happen again, here or somewhere else, and another group of people will see what we saw. I hope they have the wisdom to do what we did, carry the knowledge quietly, protect the ones who don't need to know, and keep living despite the wait. Tomorrow, I have work to do. Cabinets to install for a young couple who just bought a house. A deck to repair for a family with 3 children. The ordinary work of ordinary life in an ordinary town under an ordinary sky. The children will play in their yards. The farmers will tend their fields. People will fall in love and have babies and grow old, the same as they always have. And I'll carry my secret the way the survivors before me carried theirs. I'll look up at the stars and choose not to think about what lies beyond them. I'll live my life and do my work and love the people around me. When I die, the truth dies with me. The next generation will go on unburdened, believing in a universe that makes sense, never knowing how close they came to learning otherwise. That's not cowardice. That's not denial. That's just how you survive something you can never understand. The sky opened once. We don't talk about it. And that's the mercy. Some knowledge is too heavy to share. Some truths serve no purpose except to wound. The people of Harlow Bend learned something that summer night in 1987. Something that most humans will never know. We learned that reality has a boundary. We learned that something exists on the other side. We learned that we are contained within something vast and strange and utterly beyond our comprehension. And then we did the only thing we could do. We went back to our lives. We planted our crops and raised our children and buried our dead. We looked up at the stars and chose to see them as distant suns, not as the inner surface of a bubble we can never escape. We made our peace with the truth, and then we buried it deep, where it couldn't hurt anyone else. The children of Harlow Bend will never know what their parents and grandparents saw. They'll grow up believing the universe is vast and mysterious, but ultimately comprehensible. They'll look at the night sky and feel wonder, not dread. That's the gift we gave them. The gift of ignorance. The gift of a world that makes sense. I look up at the stars one more time, then go inside. The night is quiet. The town is sleeping. Tomorrow will be another ordinary day. The sky stays closed, and life goes on.